So all of a sudden today, a whole bunch of people, for whatever reason, started tagging this take that Colin Cowherd had in June of 2023 about Oklahoma. I did not hear it at the time. I had no idea he said it. For some reason, it just popped up in everyone's feed today, mine included. So a lot of you asked me, can you talk about it on the show? Sure, I'll talk about it. It's a very atypical segment for our show, but I'll talk about it because I think that there is some proper logic in the points that he made. But I think there is some very improper application. Like, I think he flat out whiffed on the spirit of the take. But yet I think some of the tones, like some of the themes woven into it, make total sense. So I'm about to have Colin play two pieces of sound. The first one, just to let you know, I'm going to tee it up. He had been talking about Nebraska, how Nebraska used to be a superpower. And then Nebraska kind of got left behind as the sport changed. And so Nebraska went from being a superpower to being irrelevant on the national championship scene because what used to work for Nebraska no longer worked for Nebraska. And his entire premise was, could Oklahoma be the next Nebraska? So again, this is from June of 2023. So keep in mind, now he had just seen Lincoln Riley come off, or not Lincoln Riley, he had seen him leave. He had seen Brent Venables come off a 6-7 season. So he had not seen the double-digit win season that is to come. But a lot of the evidence was already there, and maybe he was just seeing it differently. So is Oklahoma going to be the next Nebraska is the premise. Colin, roll it.
Keep your eye on Oklahoma. Is Oklahoma going to be the second program in our adult lives that disappears? Number one, the state no longer produces big numbers of players. Of the Sooners' 26 signees in their recruiting class, 3 are from the state of Oklahoma. That's having to convince kids in the South, convince kids in Texas, come to us. Secondly, they joined a tougher conference. Like Nebraska, this is going to be harder. Most of those Southern kids have grown up on the SEC. Those football players want to stay with traditional SEC powers. And number 3, in an offensive era, they hired a defensive coach, and he was completely, utterly over his skis. They didn't get the coach right.
So, man, I think he nailed it and whiffed completely all at one time. So let's break this down for just a second. The lack of in-state talent is a total misnomer. Oklahoma, if they wanted to, could go land 25 kids in the state of Oklahoma. There probably aren't 25 kids in the state of Oklahoma to the level needed to commit to Oklahoma. But don't misunderstand now. There absolutely are fewer players of that caliber in the state of Oklahoma per year than there are Georgia, than there are Florida, than there are Texas. That is a gross misunderstanding of the situation when it comes to Oklahoma recruiting. You want to talk about the lack of in-state talent? It's true, but it's also irrelevant. I'll tell you why. Because if you know anything about the Red River and south of it down to Dallas, Oklahoma owns that area every bit as much as Texas does in recruiting. Oklahoma kills it in Texas, specifically the Dallas area. Oklahoma, in the 2023 recruiting class, had 13 states represented. In the 2024 class, 12 states represented. Brent Venables has been a top 10 recruiter every year he's been at Oklahoma. So the reason they don't land a ton of kids in Oklahoma is not a bad thing. The reason they don't land them is because they can go elsewhere and get better players. Because this is not Georgia. This is not Alabama. They do have to broaden their net. And the follow-up is they do it. They do it very well. They do it exceptionally well in Texas. So the lack of in-state talent represented on the roster is totally irrelevant to what the quality of team is. They've also landed 2 top 10 portal classes in the past 3 cycles. Went and got a big-time defensive tackle that LSU wanted badly to choose Oklahoma over LSU this last cycle. And also, man, if you follow recruiting, if you're really in the weeds of this stuff, state lines do matter, but state lines have never mattered less than they matter now in recruiting. In the portal, NIL, and also advanced digital and social media age, the world's never felt smaller. The country, the map has never felt smaller. State lines have never been less relevant to where a recruit wants to go. In the old school, in the 90s and the 2000s, it meant something to cross the Chattahoochee River or to cross the Red River. Now it's just, Dude, I play Xbox with that guy from that city called Tulsa all the time, and I'm from Denton. That you don't even think about them being two different states the way a kid in 1995 would. That's the first thing. The second thing is playing in a tougher conference. Oklahoma's going to a tougher conference. That's true. And if that turns you off, you're not going to be the head coach at Oklahoma to begin with. More on that in a second. But secondly, there's a trade-off to joining a tougher conference. And that trade-off, as it relates to talent acquisition, is all of a sudden your games are on in Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas and Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama every Saturday. They care about you down there because they're going to have to play you. Therefore, the kids in those states are exposed to your brand more than willing to go play at Oklahoma. Oklahoma fits the SEC profile like a glove. This is not some oil and water situation. And thirdly, hiring a defensive coach in an offensive era, how about go hire the right coach? Hiring the right coach is the key. You know, Georgia hired the right coach. They couldn't have cared less that he's defensive-minded. Oregon's hired the right one. They couldn't care less he's defensive-minded. I'd also encourage folks to take a look at the regression back to the middle of overall style of college football. Points per game have decreased the last couple of years. So if anything, you saw an explosion, but you didn't see a perma-trend towards offense over defense in this sport. Take a look at who won the national title last year, by the way, and how they did it. And also, there's probably nobody that knows their head coach better than the folks inside the building at Oklahoma know their head coach. I point that out because they just extended him. They've seen all they need to see. They already extended Brent Venables. So I understand. Now, I understand where Colin Cowherd's going on that. I understand completely that if you're not careful, the winds of change in this sport can leave you behind. That's true. It's just not going to victimize Oklahoma. It's not in the process of doing it. It will not do it. Now, there was a second part to this. So I'm going to have Colin tee it up, and I'll react to it on the back end.
And why did Lincoln Riley leave? Because he was joining the SEC, looked at it, looked at the Bamas and the Georgias and the LSUs and the Floridas and those states and those kids and their leanings, and USC was wide open. By the way, you think Lincoln Riley didn't have a gut feeling somehow, some way, kind of felt Oklahoma to the SEC was going to be a hard pull? You go into Alabama and Georgia and LSU's backyard, welcome to SEC football.
Let me grant you all that. Just for the sake of time and argument, let's say everything he just suggested there is true. You could have multiple truths in the room here. You could have the truth that Lincoln Riley was excellent at Oklahoma. It could also be that Lincoln Riley was not the guy to take this program into this conference. Both of those things could be true. You know, a third thing could be true, and that's they had the right guy on speed dial the entire time, and it's the current head coach at Oklahoma, Brent Venables. This is not some guarantee of anything. Just like there's no guarantee that Lincoln Riley's going to get it served up to him on a silver platter when he goes to USC, because it hasn't happened there. You know, if you've got any reservations about your ability to recruit in the SEC, you don't need to be the head coach at Oklahoma. If you've got any reservations about your style working in the SEC, you don't need to be the head coach of Oklahoma. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, you go your way, they'll go their way, but I just want you to remember this year, 5 years down the road, I want you to remember, for better or for worse, there was no massive coaching search here. There was no broad net cast across the country. Lincoln Riley left. It stunned them. They dusted themselves off, and a few days later, they had Brent Venables in Norman. And that was it. It's one of the most buttoned-down athletic departments. It's one of the strongest cultures in college athletics, multiple sports, and they've got their act together. They went and got who they wanted. They had him handpicked. They've already extended his contract. So the logic tracks here. The logic that if you're not careful, dynamics in college football can change and leave you behind, totally accurate. It's happened before. He pointed out that it's happened before. There's a sweet spot that college football can have you in any given point. The Texases and Alabamas and Ohio States will always be there. There is no change that's going to come to this sport, as he pointed out earlier in that segment, that's going to leave them behind. There are changes that could come to the sport that could do the kind of things that happened to Nebraska. So the sweet spot of college football does change. Some will always be in it. Oklahoma's just one of them. Oklahoma's going to be at the head table of college football for a long time. Oklahoma is at the head table of college football. They've been there for a long time, and they will be there for a long time. There is no seismic shift in this sport that's doing anything other than tilting the table a little bit further in the direction of Oklahoma. I would actually counter the argument and make the counter that the sport is more favorable. The dynamics in college football are more favorable to Oklahoma now than they have been over the past 20 years. And over the past 20 years, they've been one of the best programs in the country. So I get the logic, man, but I totally disagree with the application of it.